folks. Social enterprise, social entrepreneurship. What does it mean in your mind? Does it have a particular resonance? Well, that's pretty much what I want to talk about. I think over the last 25 plus 30 years that I've been involved in the world of business, supporting businesses of varying shapes, the idea, the conversation around social enterprise has pretty much been coming into the fore. And I really want to explore what that actually means. I want to have a look at terms of if you are a social enterprise, if you're a social entrepreneur, what form, what structure does that take? And that's pretty much what we're going to be talking about over the duration of the next 20 minutes or so. My name is Mahmood, so if you've got any comments, then obviously please chuck them into the requisite box there, whichever platform you're streaming on or being streamed to, I should say. If you're catching up on the replay, thank you very much for your company. I think the tag is hit hashtag replay or type it in. I'll see your comments and then I can pick them up and talk about them accordingly. So why don't we crack on with what we're talking about today. So for me, the inspiration about talking about social enterprise is, again, in terms of the world of business here, people have an aim, have an objective, and if you haven't got an aim and an objective, you're pretty much going to be going all over the place, and it's about what the purpose behind their business actually is. Now, social enterprise as a term is used quite loosely, it's used quite specifically, it has a particular meaning attached to that, and obviously that's one of the things that I want to explore as far as today is concerned. And we've got a wonderful guest. Morning, Just Marina. So how are you this morning? So we've just got a guest coming on. So Zed, if you are coming on to the live stream, obviously thank you very much for giving up some of your Saturday morning. Say hello, add a comment or a question. I'll do my best to actually answer any questions that come up. So when I hear the word social enterprise, I come across lots of businesses and individuals using it in a very loose sense of the word, which is fine. But in terms of the practical implication of that term and that phraseology, it definitely has to, I think, be sort of firmed up as to what we actually mean by that itself. If I think in terms of traditional business models, most of us, we tend to think about what we call private businesses, we tend to think about charities, we tend to think about sole trader type businesses and all the rest of it. Fantastic. As far as I'm concerned, if you're a charity, if you're a what we might loosely call a not-for-profit, if you're a private company, if you're a big PLC, all those entities are businesses. They share lots of things in common, but there are differentiators between the two as well. So good morning, Graham. So Graham just popped onto the feed as well. So again, thank you very much for sparing some of your morning this Saturday. Hope you're well. So what does it mean? Now, I want to differentiate here fundamentally between what I might call a business that does good things, like it's got an ethical stance, and a business that actually is clearly as a social enterprise. And what it comes back to our raison d'etre. What's the reason we're in business for? Now, if I take an extreme example, if I think about a conventional private business, like a limited company, if I take a massive company, just by way of illustration, a company like British Telecom, perhaps, a company like Sky News, those big beasts I'm mentioning purely because most of us have come across them, most of us can recognise that. Now, those two businesses, their primary purpose is to make money. They might do it ethically, they might do it within a very positive footprint here, but those businesses predominantly are there to make money for a primary group of individuals, the investors. We might loosely call them shareholders. So those shareholders, predominantly, conventional wisdom says the main primary goal is to make profits for the purpose of those investors and by those shareholders. Now, whatever your take on shareholders is, by the way, I think shareholders probably get a bit of a bad press here. Shareholders take a risk by putting money into a company. If it all goes wrong and it all goes, the company fails, those shareholders are last in the queue to get any payout, and they suffer the biggest risk financially and otherwise here. So therefore, over time, the primary motivation is to make that money for the benefit of those shareholders. Now, you can be a private business with an ethical stance, so you do things, consideration of what your carbon footprint is, perhaps welfare and how you look after your employees, but predominantly you're not a social enterprise because your primary mission is to make profits for the distribution, for the benefit of your primary stakeholders, your shareholders. Now, if I take a social enterprise, and if you're thinking, do we know any social enterprises? Social enterprises are big businesses, by the way. So we're talking about 100,000 plus businesses in the UK that are defined as social enterprises. We're talking generating revenue into the economy of about £60 billion plus. We're talking about a big employment there of about 1 or 2 million people plus. So we're not talking small entities. So things, most of us heard of the Big Issue. Many of us have heard of the Eden Project. Now, I know it's not around anymore, but Jamie Oliver's Restaurant 15, those are all examples of social enterprise. Now, what do they have in common? Well, the primary differentiator is that the main objective, the social mission, if you wish to call it, is for the benefit of a community, for the benefit for social, and for doing good things, if you want a very loose description of them. Now, what I love about social enterprise is it's not the same as a charity, because your business is run for the primary purpose of generating funds, generating profits for the betterment of social good. Now, it could be a housing issue, it could be a well-being issue, it could be a health issue, it could be relieving poverty. But what you're doing is, and what makes it a really distinctive model from others, is that you're using still good business disciplines. You've got to have a motivation that you generate those funds by way of trading activities, so selling stuff, providing services for a fee. But the key issue is what those profits are actually generated for. And those profits are generated for the benefit and for the betterment of society. Now, I'm using society in a very loose sense here, by the way. Society, community can be a very narrowly defined geographical area, or it could be an international impact there as well. But effectively, profits is still the heart of it. Business efficiency is still the heart of it. But what you're actually doing there is you're actually using that for the betterment of a particular community, a target group there as well. Now, I've got a great example that's popped up to my feed here. So I'm just going to say good morning, Yasin. Yasin, I'm going to quote in a moment. I'm just going to put his flag up there. So good morning to you, Yasin. Now, Yasin is a great example, by the way, great test for me, at the risk of embarrassing him, of what I call a social entrepreneur and who runs a social enterprise. So he's using business disciplines. I'll share what Yasin does in a few moments, by the way, but that's a great example that just popped in there. So that is using business disciplines, but for the benefit of a particular targeted group. Morning, Yasin. I'll just, let me just suppose type that in. My apologies if it doesn't look quite like Netflix here, by the way, everyone. So I'm just using that to here. Morning, Yasin. If I can type. So again, Yasin, for me, as I said, is a fantastic example of a social enterprise and a social entrepreneur here, and he actually has been recognised in that respect. This isn't a Yasin show, by the way, but I've just he's popped into the feed. So let's just reinforce what we said here. So a social enterprise has at its core a social mission. What it also has to do to be really clearly labelled as a social enterprise, it uses business processes, business disciplines. It has a trading motivation, selling goods, selling services. So money changes hands in order to generate those profits, to make it sustainable, to make it grow for the betterment of a community for a social good. A private business, a limited company, could have a real strong ethical stance in terms of fair trade buying, how it treats its staff, paying above, say, living wage, in terms of the carbon footprint, like using recyclables, but it is still a private company. And I suppose another example that's just popped into my head, probably a TV example here, anyone who's been watching some of the TV ads that come up, so I think a well-known, shall we say, detergent brand, whose name runs with Fever, is making a big emphasis, which is really good, about using recyclable materials, making sure that the chemicals, the detergents are environmentally friendly, so that doesn't cause any issues here in terms of pollutants here. But predominantly that is not a social enterprise, it's having an ethical position, but the primary purpose of that company, again, I won't reveal the name, I'm sure you can figure it out, is being used for its shareholders, its investors. And on that point, by the way, all of this in some way, will benefit from companies prospering indirectly, whether it's our pension funds, what we save in, all that sort of stuff. But that's a conversation for another day. So that's what is a social enterprise. There is a financial limit, by the way. It tends to say at least 50% of your turnover has got to come from trading activities. Doesn't mean you can't get funds from elsewhere. That's what social enterprise is. And I think certainly I've seen in 25 plus years of advising businesses of varying shapes here, the social enterprise model and the emphasis and the stance and the requirement to be a social enterprise is certainly gaining much more traction. So you can make money. And I always think anyway, whatever you do, you've got to make money if you want to survive, if you want to further propel your business. But actually what you're using that money for, you can still reward yourself, you can still reward other people, but you're using that to the advancement of your social mission, your social objective, your social statement. Okay, so let's move on. So having got some idea what a social enterprise is, if you decide that, oh, actually, I've always wanted to do something for the betterment of a particular community. So typically it could be at a very local level. You can want to help people in the city or the town that you reside in. You can be using that to advance some social good. You might want to do it on an international landscape. Real key question is, as it would be for any business, is what's the structure, what format, what form should I actually adopt? And it's the same question that you should ask, whatever your business is. Should I be a sole trader? Should I be a limited company? Should I be, a cooperative? What's the vehicle? What's the form that I should adopt? A mistake that many people I find tend to make, by the way, is what they do, they form an entity, like, oh, let me be a limited company, and they try and squeeze their business into that particular entity here, which is, for me, is a really chaotic, backwards way of doing it. You've really got to think about what your business is currently, how your business is going to evolve over a period of time, and then you find the vehicle, you find the business structure that best meets those needs. Now, we're focusing on social enterprise in this session here, but by way of parallel, if I was starting a business all over again, and I thought, what should I be? Should I be a sole trader? Should I be a limited company? Should I be, this or that, the other? I'm going to think, what am I doing now? What's the business plan going to look like? What's the numbers going to look like? Am I taking on staff? What's the level of risk? Once I've decided all that, what my business cycle is going to look like, then I choose the format, the business structure that best suits, not the other way around, because you can get yourself into a big mess. So if I apply that same logic to a social enterprise, here's what I need to think about. Now, the common choices are, you either become what's called an unincorporated entity, so you can be still a sole trader and be a social enterprise. That's perfectly fine. You can be effectively what I call a company, and within that corporate choice, by the way, you've probably got two main choices, of which I'm then going to break it down into various subcategories. So you can be a limited company, and the whole idea of a limited company is you give birth, if you can visualize that, to a separate thing outside of you as the individual. So I form a company tomorrow, then that company, if I call it Mahmood Limited, is not me. That's separate in law and other things from me as the individual. Now, within a social enterprise, the more common structures is either what's called a company limited by guarantee, and that means if all things go pear-shaped, you as the member of that limited by guarantee, you're indemnified. Typically, you've got to contribute at least £1. A maximum is £1. That's all you're exposed to. So your yacht, your Bentley, your private assets are protected. Now, that's certainly one model. What I've seen traction of, though, that's gathering more pace, certainly since it was introduced back in 2005, is what's called a CIC, which is the acronym which stands for Community Interest Company. I'll expand on that on the next subsequent slides here, but typically the choices are sole trader. I have seen social enterprises that are sole traders. It's not that common nowadays, by the way, for a number of reasons. Typically, because of exposure to risk. Typically, it becomes very difficult to convince a funder, if you want to access pockets of money, that you are a social enterprise, but it's theoretically possible. The more popular form is what's called a company, again, either straightforward limited by guarantee, or what's called a CIC. And a CIC, by the way, is also, just to make life a bit more interesting, can be subdivided into one of two types. You can have a CIC that's limited by guarantee, or you have a CIC, it might sound strange, by the way, but actually has got shareholders in it as well. Now, that might seem a bit of a contradiction. I said earlier on that if you've got a private company that's limited there by a shareholding company, that means the individuals who own that company, the shareholders, can actually have any surplus profit for their own personal use. So that's perfectly legal, perfectly acceptable, and it's been around with us for centuries. You can have it limited by shares at CIC, but there are some restrictions, by the way, in terms of how much reward can be given to those shareholders, what they call the dividend cap. And the key thing is, as I'll expand again on the next slide, one of the key things about CIC too is that any assets that are built up in the business are locked. The individual people who form that organisation cannot benefit, and those assets are frozen legally and otherwise for the benefit of that particular entity. Or if you decide you've had enough and you want to go off and do something else, then if you dissolve that CIC, those assets have to be transferred to another similarly constituted CIC. So that's the biggest difference. So you can have a shareholding in a CIC. I have seen them, I have dealt with them. But the key thing is what protects it, what makes it different, is those assets cannot be used for the betterment of the individuals themselves. Hope that makes a bit of sense. So other forms, by the way, you might come across that, as I remember, as popular. You can have cooperatives. So obviously the ones that we all know, we use their stores. Other stores are there, but the cooperative is, as the name implies, it's a cooperative. It's there and it's a members-owned organisation. And you can have cooperatives. I've seen them in the food world. So it's effectively cooperatives in terms of we've seen the bigger scales, but I've seen shops from veganism and otherwise run as cooperatives, and it's like a form of partnership, if you can imagine that. You've got that participation, you've got that democratization of the individuals that make it up. Credit unions, by the way, are another example. Obviously, they're very specific in what they do, but those, again, those are different shapes that you can have. For me, in my experience, the most popular models are probably the CIC, brackets just a humble limited by guarantee, but CIC, I've certainly seen over the last 10, 15 years, getting more and more popular. Now, with that in mind, let's crack on and actually talk a little bit more about what that represents. So let me just go back to my banners. Now, I may not have made it obvious at the beginning. Absolutely critical here is to have in your mind, when we think CIC and people think, oh, it's got to have a social objective, so it might be for the relief of poverty, it might be improving people's living conditions, it may be giving people work opportunities, it may be for well-being. You can even have it at a local level, by the way, so a local village hall, perhaps, a local community. It's, it's a sensible thing sometimes that they're set up as CICs, so the village hall, the assets that that community owns are separately ring-fenced and locked for its protection. That might only be for the benefit of a particular tight geographical group. So as long as you don't exclude people there, the community can be very narrow. Now, when it comes to a charity, key thing is a CIC is not always a charity, and unusually not so. And a charity isn't necessarily a social enterprise. And you might think, well, is there much of a difference? And absolutely, there is a key difference there. And I would say very loosely, a CIC is what I call a hybrid instrument. It's a mixture. It's got the two heads. It's got part charity, outlook and focus, where you've got a social benefit, a social good, a social mission, improving people's lives, having an impact. And it can be, not just individuals, it can be animals as well. And it's part business, and those two get fused together. So if you've got an entrepreneurial mindset, if you like the idea of business, if you like the idea of, of hustling, and I love the world of business, I would say, I love all shapes and forms, whether they're private limited, where the motivation is to make profit purely, or whether it's a charity entity, or whether it's a CIC. I just love the way that individuals get together and they can make things actually happen. It's certainly hard work here, but it's a wonderful thing, I personally believe, to effectively be involved in the world of business. Now, when it comes to a charity, here's where the subtle differences are. So a CIC is fundamentally a fusion of business and charity, but it's not a charity. Now, a key thing is, first of all, it's the focus. So the focus is to obviously trade, to generate income. So the purpose, there is a purpose of generating profits, but it's for the use of those profits. A charity typically, its focus is, relief of poverty, betterment of individual lives there as well. But its primary motivation is not to make money. So that's one key difference between the two. Other areas where there's a big difference between CICs and charities is the funding. So, for example, what you'll find is if you constitute your social enterprise as a CIC, then what that means is the funders will feel more relaxed about supporting you. When I say funders, are things like people who might have grants, trusts, donors, will know that any surpluses built up in the entity are not for your personal betterment, they're for the betterment of the group. They're asset locked, as the technical term is. However, remember what we said, a charity primarily, not exclusively by the way, but primarily generates its funds from trusts, donations, doing what I call charitable activities there as well. It may have a trading motivation, which I'll talk about in a second. But if you're a registered charity, you probably get access to a wider pool of funds. If you're a CIC, there are certain funders out there that won't touch you, won't provide funds to you because you're not a registered charity. So it has a difference there. Some funds are restricted if you're a CIC, and therefore that's important to actually bear that in mind. Now, flexibility. The flexibility is in the sense of a CIC. You can actually effectively be a company limited by shares. So if you want to bring outside funds in, if you want to bring on board somebody who may have some funds to inject, to invest in your CIC, they can actually benefit by receiving a dividend as part of their reward there. So dividends can be paid out if you're a CIC limited by shares. You can also be a CIC limited by guarantee, which obviously removes that shareholding, but you've got that flexibility about how you structure yourself. Now, just a flag up point here, I talked about charities a few times. It's very usual these days that if a charity is aiming to do something, I'll give you a couple of examples. So we think about an animal welfare charity like the RSPCA. What it might also have a trading bit to it. British Heart Foundation, again, it's a registered charity, but it may have a trading entity to it, i.e. it's got the shops where it's selling goods that have been donated to it. Those profits that are made by that trading entity will be put for the purposes of the charity. It's not unusual for a registered charity, and I've sat on boards of charities that might have a commercial arm, they might have a cafe, they might have a restaurant, they might have merchandising. Now, that's not the main business of the charity, but obviously it needs to raise those funds for doing trading things. Now, it's not unusual that the charity does what it does as a body, and it has a separate part to its business, a CIC perhaps, that carries out the trading activities. And that's great, because what will happen is obviously that CIC, that's a social enterprise, it's out there to generate funds, to make profits, but it uses those funds and it will transfer those back to the charity. So you'll tend to find charities and social enterprise will go hand in hand, albeit not under the same umbrella. So flexibility is a great thing. Now, the other thing why I think a lot of people like the idea of a CIC as opposed to a charity, apart from a charity being having its own very detailed rules about how it operates, how to set one up, and it's very involved, how it has to account for the funds that it generates, is in the sense that of the control. Now, what do I mean by control? If you're the founder and you do something for us, you say one day, okay, I want to set up something, I want to help people who are disadvantaged in my local community, overseas, or in a wider territory. You know, there are people who are finding it very difficult to get access to clean water. There are people who don't get access to housing. There's poverty going on, and I want to do something that's socially beneficial for that. So I start something. Now, I start, let's say for argument's sake, this social enterprise. I'm making profits, I'm selling goods, I'm selling product. I'm saying everything that I sell, I give 50% back. I put it for that purpose. There's my social mission. It's reinforced that by those business disciplines, by that business activity. Well, as the organization develops, what tends to happen is you might then recruit more people to help you. So you might want to get individuals to act as your advisors. You might have a board, I use that loosely, building up to actually help you. And what happens is that sometimes you don't want to lose control, lose direction, because it's your baby, it's your vision, it's your outlook here. And we don't actually like to let go. And I can perfectly sympathize with that. In my own businesses, as I've developed my business over the last 25 plus years, I've got a team that I work with that works with me. I've been on the boards of other entities here, and the founders find it very difficult to walk away. A CIC gives you that ability to actually be in charge, if I want to use that term, to reward yourself and pay yourself, and still to control the entity. I give it its strategic overview, give it the direction, your passion goes in it, driving it along, and you can do that as a CIC. If you form a charity, unfortunately, you can't do that, because you cannot be, say, for example, the trustee. You cannot be the one who's giving oversight for the charity, running the charity, and be paid for it as well. That typically is a very, very murky water. So CIC gives you that benefit of still retaining control of your organisation. And when I say control, it doesn't mean you're a control freak, but you are you're creating something. Your energy, your enthusiasm goes into bringing something to life, and that's your passion that drives it forward. And you don't want to relinquish that to somebody else who may not look at it through the same ways that you do. Doesn't mean that you should never step down, by the way, but in terms of the here and now, you can pay yourself. And if you can't, by the way, run an organisation where you reward yourself somehow, then I think all you've got on your hands is a really very time-consuming hobby. It's absolutely critical that your organisation, whatever shape that is, has to look after the people who run that organisation somehow. And if you don't, and you underpay yourself, you don't reward yourself, I think therein lies disaster, and it's not a very positive thing to actually do. So I'm going slightly off track there. So reining that in, you've got the flexibility, and you can maintain controls as CIC. Now, if you're thinking, oh, actually, Mahmood, that's wonderful, but actually over a period of time, I'm eventually, in my mind, I'm thinking, I've got the social enterprise going. One day, I actually want it to be a charitable organisation. Well, that's not unusual. In your business planning, in your sort of progression as such, you can do things that says, I'm going to go into maybe a CIC format. And over time, what's going to happen is I'm going to convert that CIC. I'm going to make that into a charity. And I've been involved quite a few times with that process. And it's possible, certainly now with legislation, procedures, and everything else, your CIC, that social enterprise, can be converted into a charitable organisation. So it's not off the table. But key thing is they're not the same. A few other things just to flag up, by the way. There's things like tax. So CICs, by the way, are businesses. Albeit they're social enterprise business, but they're business nevertheless, which means you still pay corporation tax. You're still subject to that regime. A charity will not pay corporation tax on its surpluses. A CIC will be subject. So that might be an issue. Rates. CIC doesn't get any exemption from the local authority on rates relief or the discretionary rates relief. A charity will do. 80% of its rates are exempted, and there's an extra 20% that is potentially factored in there as well. Other things as well, not unusual for individuals who think the CIC is doing a great thing. CIC wants to raise money, it gets donations. Those donations are really welcome. Remember, donations aren't trading, but those donations are really good, and it supports the aims and the objectives of the CIC. If it's a charity who receives donations, they can get what's called gift aid of those here. If you refer to an earlier broadcast I did on charities and tax effective giving, I think gift aid was mentioned there. So again, I'm going to revisit that later on. But again, if you're a charity, donations attract gift aid, an extra 25%. If you're a CIC getting donations, you don't. So as with all these things, think carefully, think structure, obviously make sure you get the right advice as to what to do next. Now let's come into that, so the last elements of this presentation. Good to know. One of the things I think really particularly stands out, and why, from a personal level, I love the world of social enterprise, and I love the world of business per se, but I like social enterprises, is because it gives you the ability to do something which is primarily focused towards a social purpose, a social good. So you're not doing a business with a nice ethical stance, which I think is to be recommended, but your actual social purpose is for the benefit of your community, for the betterment of others. Somehow there's a social mission behind it. That's the primary purpose. However, you've got to run it as a business in the sense of things like business planning. Key, I think whatever business you are, business planning has got to go in there. If you don't plan, you've got a real big problem on your hands. Looking after cash flow, making sure all your records are well kept up to date, making sure you've got a good system that says, this is what we're spending, this is what we should be spending. So those business frameworks and discipline about cash flow management, pricing, all that entrepreneurial flair that you want to exhibit, you really need to translate into your social enterprise. Now, what do we do next, everyone? So hopefully that was of some use, some benefit. If you feel, actually, Mahmood, I like what you're saying, I'd like to keep in contact, and I'd like to obviously hear more about the world of social enterprise business per se, drop me a line here and I'll add you to our newsletter, be part of our client family. You don't actually have to be a client, by the way, to be part of our newsletters, our sort of communication framework. We just love sharing. Obviously, we like making money as well, but do that. Also, if you think, okay, that's good, as I said, you can subscribe to a newsletter. I'll provide a link or two at the end of this broadcast. I have a weekly podcast called I Hate Numbers. So there's lots of different ways that you can access some of this information, access some of these news. Hopefully you got some benefit from this, guys. And if you are in the world of social enterprise, or you are thinking about getting to the world of social enterprise, and you want to share your story, share some thoughts, or get in contact, please do so accordingly. And apart from that, everybody, you have a brilliant week. Really thanks for liked your company this week. And I'm going to say goodbye. Have a great Saturday as we sign off. What do I do here? I go back into this and I go, it's good night for me and it's good night.